The interesting question to try and answer is not why people are doing it, but why don't they do that?
A lot of the people who are involved in check fraud or running drop and mule accounts, things like that, it's not really one-off people.
You can pay someone $100 to fetch all the information you need about the individual, about the accounts of the individual in order to engage in account takeover or check fraud.
Let me ask you this, and because it's evident you've got experience. Where's it going? Hi, I'm Brett Johnson, former United States Most Wanted criminal, now good guy. Today's world, criminals come in all shapes and sizes, but they all have one thing in common. They all have criminal thoughts. Today's episode, we look at cybercrime trends with cybersecurity expert David Maimon. Before we get started, Brian, my producer, what type of news do we have of the day?
The first story this week is coming from your neck of the woods. A Birmingham man has been indicted on federal charges in a scheme to sell fraudulent checks on Telegram for more than $15 million. 24-year-old Mekhi Dewan Harris was charged with conspiracy, wire fraud, and bank fraud. Prosecutors say Harris was involved in a scheme to sell stolen checks on a Telegram channel called Work-Related Slips, which is dedicated to the sale of stolen or fraudulent checks. Investigators observed thousands of posts with stolen or fraudulent checks, with many victims in the Jefferson County area.
All right, so it turns out that maybe I know a little something about this case. I am in Birmingham. This guy was in Birmingham. So he stole a lot of checks, and they would steal the checks out of the blue boxes, questionable out of the blue boxes, because turns out that he had some postal employees that were working for him as well. That's at least what everyone is saying right now. They would take the checks. They would take photographs of the checks, post them on the Telegram channel, and then sell them. And David, our guest today, is an expert in that. He's been posting this stuff for several months, and we're going to talk to him about that. This guy that was posting the checks, he was so brazen that some of the stolen checks were from sheriff's offices in Alabama. Guess what? He would post pictures of those and sell those as well. Needless to say, law enforcement does not like that, so they really got it for this guy good. He ran to Texas. They found him in Texas. As a matter of fact, there are indictments that continue to happen. Just a couple of days ago, another Birmingham resident by the name of 88 Day, a rapper, was also indicted, and we'll talk about him more on a future episode. Let's go ahead and get to the next news clip as well, Brian.
Next, we're going to Florida, where a University of Miami student is facing 45 years after funding Dubai trips with his girlfriend through a $4 million fraud scheme. 21-year-old Matthew Bergwall of Coral Gables was charged with conspiracy to commit computer and mail fraud. Between 2021 and 2022, Bergwall was able to have unauthorized access to accounts belonging to a shipping and receiving management company. Bergwall and his team would enter fake tracking info for goods the company was transporting all over the United States. This allowed them to pursue full refunds from retailers while maintaining physical possession of items such as high-end electronics, jewelry, and designer clothing.
All right, and once again, it turns out that I may know something about this too. Refunding fraud is what this is an example of, and refunding fraud has been going on for several years. It's so successful from the criminal side of things, from that viewpoint, that it really redefines a lot of cybercrime as it happens. It used to be that beginning cyber criminals would go to the dark web, they would buy stolen credit card details, they would try to steal laptops, cell phones, things like that. Most of them would fail miserably because they didn't know what they were doing. That changed several years ago. We started to see on a dark web marketplace called Evolution Market that people were coming on saying that they were making $10,000 a month doing Amazon refunds. We did not believe that. It turns out, though, that they were, and today that type of fraud has gotten to the point where most beginning cybercriminals start with refunding fraud. They begin making money immediately, and that bankrolls their education into other types of fraud as well. Now, that being said, there's a few different ways that you can do that. You can order the item, you can claim that it didn't arrive, and usually, or sometimes these days, the merchant will send you a replacement item. You can claim that, hey, I got the retail box, but it wasn't in the box, and I need that replacement at that point, and they send it to you at that point. The other thing that you can do is you can do what's called FTID, which is what Matthew Bergwall was doing, and that's fake tracking identification. You can make it appear that you've sent that item back or that it was lost in transit. The merchant thinks it's either lost or they actually receive the item back, and they give you a refund at that point. There's a fourth one, though, that goes on. Right now what we're seeing a lot of insiders at these shipping companies that also are complicit in these types of refund frauds that's taking place. Law enforcement is doing an outstanding job. Turns out that I was able to assist to some small degree in that. They're slated to arrest a couple of 300 people or criminals throughout the rest of this year. For today's Criminal Insight, what I'd like to talk about is how criminals view the world. And a lot, let's not say all because I hate absolute thinking, but a lot of criminals view the world as predator-prey. And that's how they see every single relationship. What can I get from this person? And if we're talking about online crime, you're talking about information, access, data, or cash. And they're always looking to prey upon people. That being said, we're going to bring in David Maimon, professor at Georgia State University. He specializes in proactive fraud intelligence. We're going to talk about how these criminals operate, some of the crimes that they commit, and then go from there. David, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Brett.
David, I owe you, and you know I do, I owe you an apology because you know as well as I do, I have been hammering you fairly often on LinkedIn, and it's been uncalled for. You know that.
You don't need to apologize. I'm open to critique. I mean, I don't know everything, and if there are things that I make mistake, sometimes I made a mistake. I mean, someone should call me out. So, no need to apologize.
Well, I still think that I owe you an apology. I truly do. And I can be rather coarse sometimes. And I apologize for that. You have been outstanding with your posts on LinkedIn, with showing everything that a lot of these criminals are doing, and it has absolutely made a difference. We know that with the checks, with the drop accounts, with the mule accounts that you've posted, all these different things. And I really appreciate the work that you do, and I just wanted you to know that.
Thank you so much, my friend. And again, no need to apologize. As an academic, they teach you to take criticism and just face them in the best way you can. So,
Well, it's like that movie Whiplash. The guy says the worst words in the English language are good job. And that's kind of the way I lead my life.
100%.
So before we get into this, David, could you talk to me? Could you tell the audience who you are and why people should listen to you?
My name is David. As you mentioned, I'm a professor in Georgia State University, and I direct the evidence-based cybersecurity research group. What we do as part of our academic research is really try to understand how criminals work and what works and what doesn't work in the context of online crime prevention and mitigation. So, we have all these really cool research operations where we, try to understand how things are for real. Diving into all those places where the criminals spend a lot of time in, deploying honeypots, simply try to keep our hands dirty by answering this question of, again, what works and what doesn't. As part of what we do, we spend a lot of time on Darknet, Telegram, other social media platforms where criminals spend a lot of time on as well. And we simply try to understand how these guys are doing whatever they're doing, right? And we're trying to understand their thought processes. We're trying to understand the modus operandi. We're trying to understand, the different types of individuals they target. We try to identify emerging trends. Simply an interesting operation, trying to understand the online fraud ecosystem.
Right. Let me ask you this. You said trying to understand. What I'm kind of interested in, and I've actually seen through your post, I've seen this growth arc that you've been going through. I truly have, and it's amazing. It really is. But my question is from when you began doing this to now, how has your perception of online crime changed, or has it remained the same?
It has changed a lot. I have to tell you that, simply because I think I understand why these guys are doing this, right? And I think you do as well, Brett.
I might.
I think so. So to me, especially at this point, knowing what we know about everything that everyone is trying to sort of do in order to prevent fraud, we understand that it's fairly easy to engage in fraud nowadays. That's what we're seeing, this ramping fraud. At the end of the day, you're seeing people trying to get easy money. Folks are trying to engage in cool types of crimes, which will get them a lot of money, low probability of detection. That's why they're doing it. So to me, the interesting question to try and answer is not why people are doing it, but why don't they do that, right? I mean, and this is kind of a traditional criminological questions I haven't thought a lot of during the last 15 years I'm engaging in criminological research, but in the context of fraud, oh my gosh, I mean, it's so easy, as you know. Probability of detection is so low.
Right.
And so, it makes sense to me why people are doing this. It doesn't make sense to me. I'm trying to figure out why fraud fighters are doing what is it that they're doing. So,
well, I mean, that is a question,
right?
With me, and my history. I was that U.S. most wanted criminal. I built a lot of the backbone of what we see today, and now I'm this guy that's kind of like I call myself. I don't say I'm reformed. I say that I am a recovering criminal, and I take that seriously. I'm kind of this teetotaler. I mean, I go whole hog into making sure that not only I'm doing the right damn thing, but calling out other people who may not, or companies who may not. And I get my ass in trouble sometimes over that, as I'm sure you know. Right. But this idea, that's a very good question. This idea of why people would try to fight that fight against these people who are committing fraud, especially when, as you point out, fraud is extremely easy. The likelihood of getting caught almost zero. And, there's a few reasons for that. I mean, we've got 37,000 FBI agents. Of those 37,000, about 280 concentrate on cybercrime. And it's not just the FBI that's a problem. It's across the spectrum. Then you've got jurisdictional issues. The internet lends itself to anonymity. It's very difficult to pinpoint, prosecute, recover money, anything else like that. And you've got a lot of people, you are one of the ones that I include in this. You've got a lot of people that you bust your ass every single day to try to figure out how to stop what appears to be an unstoppable wave of crime.
It's interesting, right? I mean, the wave is definitely increasing. And unfortunately, at this point, very difficult to anticipate exact numbers and where we're going to be in a year from now. But, what I can tell you is that from where I sit and from what I see, it's only going to get worse till it's get better, right? And again, going back to the original question of, why fraud fighters are doing this. I mean, I actually spent a lot of time thinking and talking to fraud fighter about this. Because think about the average salary of a fraud fighter and compare that salary to how much you can make on a single day on the fraud ecosystem.
Right.
Right. I mean, it goes without saying that rationally, right, it doesn't make any sense, right, to not do that. And yet you see really good people trying to prevent on behalf of the banks, on behalf of the government, without really getting all the resources they need, to fight that, right? I mean, you talk a lot to law enforcement, you talk a lot to, folks who do fraud fighting in the financial industry. They're not getting all the resources they need in order to prevent and mitigate in an efficient way.
Well, I mean, not only are they not getting the resources. I mean, they're not only not getting the resources, but a lot of the times, I mean, let's be frank about it. A lot of the times, you've got your management that simply doesn't want to hear about the fraud problems that are out there. They want to put a new product out. They want to make sure that they're profiting, and they you look at SolarWinds, you look at chargebacks 9/11, the trouble that they got back in just a few months ago. It appears that a lot of the time that it's more important for the company to make profit than it is to mitigate fraud.
And that is the other important contributor to what we're seeing this huge tide now in fraud, right? Because, you have low probability for detection. Enforcement, they're doing whatever they can, but it's very difficult, right?
Right.
And then you have the financial industry writing off those fraud losses, so in a way fueling more of this issue, right? And so again, the question to me is not why you do that. I mean, I understand exactly why they're doing it. It's so easy, it can make a lot of money. And if you know what you're doing, as I think, again, Brent, I mean, right, the probability of detection is very, very low.
It is.
The real question is, why don't you do that? And if you work in a huge insurance company or a huge FI, the question is, why wouldn't you engage in embezzlement, or why wouldn't you help these guys and make more money on the $60 or $80 or even $150,000 you make every year, right? So the ecosystem is fascinating in that sense, right? Because they have major companies wanting to make money, paying fraud fighters to prevent fraud, but do not give them enough resources to do that. And then you have the criminals who are so creative, and they are constantly finding loopholes. They're constantly finding new ways to take advantage and exploit. And they're making all our life miserable, sort of speaking, and it's just the start. As again, I assume right? I mean,
I know.
Tracking this issue for a long period of time, right? I mean, that we're not at this point. We're not going into we're not going in the right direction.
We're not winning this.
So fascinating ecosystem, and that's what I do. I mean, simply because I'm curious about all these questions.
No, and they're good questions, and Here's something I want to talk about with you, because I find this fascinating right now. As you know, the first episode of Criminal Thoughts, I talked about some of the war that I had waged with this Telegram channel. One of the really interesting things, and it really opened my eyes to get me to appreciate what you're doing even more. Just going on and posting videos, snapshots of all the different types of crime that's taking place. So I did an in-depth attack, OSINT type of attack on Shark Tank. And just that week that I was really embedded in that channel, the amount of fraud, the diversity of the types of fraud that was just in that one channel was absolutely extraordinary. And what really topped it off were the criminals that were on that channel. They were not very bright. They were not computer geniuses by a long shot. But they were still very successful with that. I was talking, and this channel does a lot of SIM swaps. And I found out that a lot of SIM swaps are done by insiders at the respective mobile phone companies. And I was told that on average, these insiders are only paid $200 to $300.
That's right.
To do a SIM swap. That's amazing when you think about it. So you're paying someone $200 to do a SIM swap. That gives me, the attacker, the criminal, access to someone's cryptocurrency account, to their bank account, to their credit cards. I mean, it opens the door for me to ruin that person's life if I want to. and I'm only having to pay $200 to get that type of access. That's absolutely amazing.
So much of it's happening all over. I mean, you're talking about sales carriers, but what about folks who work for financial institutions?
Right.
Different banks. I mean, you can pay someone $100 to fetch all the information you need about the individual, about the accounts of the individual, in order to engage in account takeover or check fraud. What about insiders who work within the credit bureaus? And we know of a lot of those, right? Giving you access to those really powerful tools who can fetch any type of information you need about anyone's credit history, anyone's past within seconds, and then you can ruin that person's life, as you mentioned earlier. So the insiders, it's a huge issue, again, because folks are getting paid so little to do such an important work. It goes without saying, right, that at this point we need to do something about them. The question is what? This is some of the challenges that we as an ecosystem, like the fraud fighting ecosystem, will have to address sooner or later.
Well, and the reason I brought that up, so you're taking some of these insiders, they're not really making a lot of money. I can't imagine that an insider at one of these phone companies is doing any more than maybe 10, 15 of these things on a weekly basis. Right. So you're talking $2,000 to $3,000 at tops. Yep. So $10,000 a month, that's good money, but it's not making you rich. So if you're not doing it for money, why are you doing it?
Again, it's a matter of perspective. $10,000 is a lot of money for some people, man. It really depends where you're coming from. And if you hold a steady job, sort of speaking, I assume you need the money. So the 10 large you're getting in order to, I don't know, buy your wife a new Cartier watch or whatever, right? It works, right? It will not make you rich, filthy rich, right? But it will help you. It will help you over the month, right? Maybe you'll be able to send money to help your mother or your kids or whatever. So we are not, in the context of the insiders, we're not talking about folks who makes millions of dollars every month, but still, it helps them pass by.
That's a solid point. I'll give you that. It is. It's why do you think these guys are on these Telegram channels? Taking selfies, telling each other's real name. So, David, I saw screen names. I saw their screen names that had part of their real name in the screen name.
Listen, you know what I've been posting. I've been doing this for the last 5 years.
Right.
And to tell you the truth, we kind of found Telegram by chance. We were spending a lot of time on the darknet, as you said, a lot of activity on the darknet, but wasn't as interesting as what we've seen on Telegram. At one point,
it's a party on Telegram.
That's right. So at some point, 2018, we were engaging with one of the folks we were monitoring on darknet. He told us, "Listen, I don't want to talk over the market. Let's move it to Telegram. I have a shop there." And I'm like, "What? I didn't know what Telegram was." 2008. He told us, "Download it. Let's talk there." Boom. We got access to a trove of really interesting intelligence, and then it was early. You're able to get into really cool groups. People were talking about people were forming the online shopping centers back then, right? And we got lucky, right, to see what is it that these guys were posting. And I'm telling you, what you're seeing right now, think about 4 years ago what people were posting. I
was there. I was there.
I know you were there. So you know that more names and more pictures and they were exposing their home addresses. Mind-boggling, right? And I think the reason why they were doing this back then was that they didn't think that law enforcement was there. Right, that's one important thing, right? And to be frank, 4 years ago, I don't think law enforcement were there.
I can confirm that it hasn't been that long.
That's right. So, so they felt comfortable doing that. The other reason, I mean, they saw that there's no enforcement, and so they become brazen. I mean, it's part of the social media platform that allows you to brag about how much money you make and your skills and who you know and what you know with respect to the online fraud ecosystem. The harvest you make with respect to identity, with respect to the checks, with respect to everything that happens there. Evidence that you can provide with respect to your skills if we're talking about checks or we're talking about hacking. So folks felt comfortable doing this. And I have to tell you that nowadays we're seeing that I wouldn't say they stopped, but they're more reluctant providing some of the information, even though, as you said, I mean, you still see it over there, so you can expose them and dox them, as
Right.
I know you've done during the last couple of weeks or so. So good for you. But and nowadays I think it's more complicated to do that simply because they're more aware. They know the banks are there. They know law enforcement are there. They know you are there, and groups like mine, and so
Right.
they're more cautious about whatever they put out there.
What do you think about, so when I talk about crime, I say there's three reasons, and I want to get your feedback on this. I say there's three motivations, that it's status, cash, and ideology. Most attacks are done for cash. Criminals are wanting to profit. But when I talk about status, what I say is that if a criminal can do something in their group that no one else can do, they gain the respect of that group, and that respect equates to profit, so status. But this theory that I've got goes a little bit further than that, and I'm thinking that for a criminal that doesn't really have any skill, and most of them do not.
Right.
Most of them buy tutorials, someone walks it through, and as you just said, and as we know, fraud is not difficult to profit with. So if you don't have a skill set, the only real way to gain status or respect is by showing pictures of cash, by showing the cars that you're driving or the watches that you're stealing, stuff like that. Do you think that has credence or not?
I think it's interesting. I think it's definitely part of it. I think, as I've spent a lot of time thinking about why people are doing what they're doing in the context of crime. I mean, you're talking about cash, you're talking about status, right? I mean, you can go for cash and status also in the legitimate normative society.
Sure.
Right. So if I want to challenge that hypothesis, I will say, okay, I mean, I want money, I want cash. Why would I be a criminal? I can go and be an attorney, hopefully make a lot of money there. I think again, spending some time thinking about, especially in the context of fraud, and thinking about it in the context of my own kids as well, the major reason why folks, in my mind, are sort of engaged in crime is that in their mind, it's okay. You know what I mean? And so in a way, there's this really cool criminological theory, and I'm no longer into criminological theories. I mean, they're interesting, but I like stories, but I like when the stories actually have evidence, right? So there's this theory essentially suggesting that folks will engage in crime if the definitions favorable towards violating the law will outweigh, if the extent of definition favorable towards violating the law outweigh the definition that are favorable towards violating the law. In other words, if you grow up in an environment where people tell you it's okay to launder money, it's okay to offend, it's okay to smoke, it's okay to do all that, then in your mind and say, yeah, I mean, it's okay, I'll do that, right? I mean, there's really no harm in me doing that. And so that's why people are doing this, right?
I mean, it makes sense. I mean,
and so I'm thinking about it, man, in the context of my own kids, right? I keep telling. So what's the big, major thing that folks are worried about when they engage in crime? Getting caught and going to prison, right? If you normalize that, if you tell them it's part of life, then people say, well, if they catch me, I go spend a year or two in prison, and then I continue to do whatever I did, right? Because it's part of the life cycle, then, it's okay. I'll continue to do that. And then, you teach your kids to launder money. They can become millionaires quite quickly, right? I mean, as long as you normalize that thought process to them. So to me, that is what it's all about. I mean, as long as you have more exposure to criminals, or at least to a favorable definition towards violating the law, why wouldn't you do that, right? I mean, again, status, cash, all these things you mentioned, you can get it in the normative society as well. You don't need to be a criminal in order to get that.
And I mean, you're going down a bit of a rabbit hole there because I kind of agree with you on that.
Yeah.
Like my life, I grew up with not my mom and that side of the family. They were fraudsters. So I grew up with that background where, hey, that's how you live. That's what you do. Now,
and that's okay, right?
Well, it was then, but let's be honest. At some point, you have to take responsibility for your life. You just can't, blame it on mom and dad for the rest of your life.
100%.
But what you're saying, I think it goes even bigger than that. I mean, we look at the people we have in power. We look at some of the corporations, how the reporting goes on that, and I think you've got a point. It normalizes committing crime. Well, if they can do it, why can't I?
That's right. Yeah.
That's to me, sad situation.
And so to me, that is, at least in my mind, right? I mean, thinking about it so long, not only the context of fraud, but also other types of crime. At the beginning of my career, I was studying violence and homicide and things of that sort till I realized that there's really no money in that. So,
right. You're not going to get paid doing that.
Exactly. So I had to shift to fraud, right? Because, it makes more money, right? But I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about the way you normalize things for yourself, your thought process.
I like that. I don't like it, but I like that idea. I think that's got a lot of merit to it. Let me ask you this. When I was committing crime, and Lord knows I've got a history of it, but when I was committing crime, cybercrime, the mixture of physical world crime, now we had it, running drop addresses and things like that, but the mixture of physical world crime and online crime, it was not nearly as copacetic as what we see today. Today, especially with stolen checks, robbing mailboxes, a lot of other types of fraud that's online, there absolutely is a physical world element. Can I get your thoughts on that?
100%. So, in the criminological literature, right, whatever that means, right, there's this discussion with respect to, you have the mainstream criminologists who believe that cybercrime is essentially, crime, right? And so we shouldn't really have specific tools or specific, different ways to study that types of crime than the way we study, offline crime, right? And so you have that sort of mainstream criminological sort of thinking. Then you have a new thinking of folks who call themselves cybercriminologists who suggest otherwise. And they have this clear distinctions between, online and offline crimes.
Okay.
I have to tell you that I sit on the mainstream criminologist camp. I believe that crime is crime. Yeah, crime is crime. It's really, breaking the law, very difficult to create those boundaries between online and offline. Folks try to differentiate between cyber-enabled and cyber-dependent crimes.
Right.
Yeah, I understand that. I appreciate this differentiation. But at the end of the day, as you just mentioned, folks are stealing checks, uploading those on Telegram. What is it? Is it online crime, offline crime? What essentially is going on there, right? So I'm with you in that sense. We definitely see more online and offline environments getting intertwined. And to me, to study that, it's getting more and more complicated, but not impossible as long as you're there with the criminals, collecting data directly from the field and try to understand what is it that they're working on, or try to understand the progression of the criminal event. So again, to me, as someone who just want to keep understanding folks in their natural habitat, understand how they work, understand the ecosystem.
I'm studying criminals in their natural habitats.
Exactly. Yeah.
I love
online, that. It is right. It is what it is, right? It's their natural habitat. It's the online world that they're out there, right? And they engage in crime on the online environment. And I'm not sending any survey to sort of ask them how they feel about the crime they just committed, right? I mean, I just see what they did, and I'm trying to figure out,
and do you really need to send them a survey to know how they feel? They profited by it. They don't give a damn about the victim.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, you don't really need a survey for that.
And in the context of, and this is one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, in the context of prevention and mitigation, to me, it's more, and this is my thought, right? I mean, I'd love to get your take on that. It's as a fraud fighter, as an online crime fighter, it's more valuable to understand how folks are doing things in order to try and disrupt what is it that they do, than understanding why they're doing things and their thoughts and processes during the engagement in crime, right? Would you agree with that statement?
So it's interesting that you bring that up. When I first began this legal career of mine, this would have been 2016, 17. I was giving ISMG had brought me in for their conferences to give, a keynote at all the cities they were going through. It was about the third keynote I gave. There was a lady in front of me, and she was talking about synthetic identity fraud. And she was giving these statistics about it. And she didn't know one thing about that fraud, had no idea how it was committed, had no clue whatsoever. And as I was watching, I was like, really, if you don't know how the fraud is committed, how can you hope to mitigate it at all? So I got up there right after her, and I gave a walkthrough. This is exactly how it's done. Bam, 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 bam. And since that point, when I give a presentation, if I'm talking about a specific type of fraud, I walk through exactly how that fraud is committed, because I believe that really is one of the most important things that you have to know. If you don't know how you're being victimized, how could you ever hope to stop it at all? So yeah, I'm down with you on that. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's key, right, to understand the progression of the criminal event if we want to prevent and mitigate. Again, at the end of the day, we're getting paid through the state, doing research for the state, and I understand the notion that some scientists have that we shouldn't really. I mean, the research should be pristine. We shouldn't really care about policies and things of that sort. Some scholars suggest that. I think that we should care about policy because folks are paying our salaries using their taxes, and at the end of the day want to give back, and to study crime in a way that potentially will lead to some solutions, prevention, mitigation, to me make more sense than just studying crime for the sake of it.
I agree.
So that's the approach I take.
I like that. Let me ask you this. I talked about the Czech guy at the top of the show that was arrested here in Birmingham. Birmingham got so bad. I live in Hoover. It got so bad that they removed the blue drop boxes from outside of the main USPS station. That's how bad it got. Right. All right. Yeah. I know for a fact that what led to some of these arrests were, of course, someone else got arrested in another state, and they found evidence on his computer, and then they started to talk to him. But what's interesting is that a lot of the people who are involved in check fraud or running drop and mule accounts, things like that, it's not really one-off people. We're seeing right now a lot of gang involvement, street gang involvement, coming into these types of environments. Are you seeing the same thing or not?
Yeah, we talked about it in 2022. We started talking about it in 2021, August 2021. We published on this in 2022, January, and we outlined the entire supply chain out there. So you have the folks
walk through that for me. I gotta friggin' hear.
So you have, we did that in 2022. Things have evolved dramatically, and the fact that we're able to see how things evolve is so interesting to me. So folks started with robbing the mail carriers, and then moving the arrow key, which is the key which opened the USPS mailboxes to the rest of the gang or two other actors on the gang who went to the USPS mailboxes in the middle of the night, opened the USPS mailboxes, empty them, then chauffeur the mail into hideout location, usually cheap hotel rooms where where they had the rest of the gang along with few drug addicts sitting them.
Well, they're cheap work at that, but it's inexpensive labor.
And we know how much they paid them, right? I mean, they gave them a Wendy's meal along with $100 for the whole night to sort through the mail and find the checks, the debit cards, everything that they were looking for. So from that point, they had to find runners and walkers. I mean, the runners essentially bring the walkers. Runners are essentially folks who take the checks and then try to cash them. They had so many checks on their disposal, so they had to start selling the checks.
Right.
And that is where they started. I mean, at some point they realized they have too many. They don't have enough bank accounts and enough mules, so they have to start opening the drop accounts. And so, this is where we start to see the increase in the volume of drop account services being offered out there, right? So, the supply chain is so detailed. I mean, you had folks now sitting in the credit bureaus fetching information about the identities on the checks. You had, the stories I can tell you, man, with victims we've stood in touch with. One of them is actually because of you rightfully asking me if I reached out to the owner of the check. And, I told you I did. And I did that right after you told me to do that.
I know.
So it turned out in that case, which ended up with the FBI, right? I mean, we were able to find 3 checks. We reached out to the individual. Each check was over $200,000. We reached out to the owner. The owner got back to me, freaked out. I told him, this is what we have. You may want to freeze your credit score, do something.
You might want to do something.
Yeah. He got back to me the day after telling me he's missing 2 more checks. And overall, he realized that $2 million were lost in a form of a tax refund. And essentially, he told me what these guys did was they took his company name and they added an S at the end of the company's name. They opened a bank account using the same address that this guy was using for his company, aged the account, and then deposited the 5 checks, stealing $2 million that way. So you see, I mean, these guys have insiders all over the place. I mean, they help you open companies at this point. Yeah, they help you fetch information about the identities. Right. They help you register the companies. They help you hire employees. Man, I mean, the supply chain is so sophisticated at this point. And what's sad to me, man, is the fact that we've been talking about this for a while now, and people were pushing back. And you know it as much as I am. When you start talking about things, and people think that you're bluffing, right? I mean, they will push back. Back then, they were asking me, who still writes checks? And I told him, listen, I don't know, but we are seeing thousands of checks on a monthly basis on the platforms we are overseeing. And again, nobody believed, and it was only until the end of 2022, when the bank said that they're losing all this money, that people realized that this is an issue. And I'm not even talking about USPS and law enforcement and all that. I mean, and I understand it takes time to adjust. I understand it takes time to sort of engage in enforcement. But where we at this point is a situation where the train has left the station with all our identities. If in the past, and you guys, you know it best of all people I've talked to during the last year or so. In the past, people were looking for identities on the darknet. Now they're looking for the identities on the streets.
Absolutely.
Because our identities are simply rolling down the streets, right?
Right.
So now we're in a point where our identities are simply out there. You have tentacles all over the place of these criminal organized crime groups, and they're stealing millions of dollars from the financial industry as well as from the government. And that is a very sad place we're at this point.
It is. I mean, I talked to one guy on Telegram, and I believe what he said. He said that when they went to steal mail, did the roundup around the blue boxes, that they had a U-Haul, that it took a U-Haul truck to hold the mail that was being stolen, is what they said.
Dude, I mean, I have videos of these guys filming themselves at the beginning of all this, right? I mean, in 2022, like January and February, showing you how they're doing this. I mean, so in one of the videos we have you see a female going, I mean, you see a male and a female sitting in a car, and then you see a female going to several USPS location with a Dior bag, opening the Dior bag, opening the mailbox and simply emptying it into the Dior bag, and then they chauffeur everything to the hotel room. And I mean, it's mind-boggling. And to tell you the truth, and it's getting more sophisticated, because at this point they don't even do it in the middle of the night. They do it in the middle of the day using USPS uniforms.
Right. Yeah. I've seen the uniforms for sale. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's crazy, man.
Let me ask you this, and this is, I said I had a theory that I wanted to bounce off of you when I invited you on the show. And here's the theory. I looked for the article. I can't find it. A contact of mine on LinkedIn reached out to me, and he wanted my opinion on this, and I gave him my opinion. He said that he had read a study that cryptocurrency use on the traditional dark web had dropped. And he asked me why I thought that was. And my initial knee-jerk reaction, and I don't think it's wrong, my initial knee-jerk reaction was, well, because now you've got Telegram is the Wild West of cybercrime. So most criminals are on Telegram. Then I started to think about it. And I said, okay, not only are they on Telegram, but cash is king. And this is where it kind of opened up my eyes to some of the work that you've been doing, posting all these drop and mule accounts. So you've got a less sophisticated criminal with these street gangs coming in, committing crime, this mixture of physical crime and online crime. Cash is king. Why would I worry about cryptocurrency if I have a drop or a mule account that gives me cash in pocket?
I agree. I mean, I definitely think it's part of it. And especially if you think about it in the context of law enforcement getting better and better in de-anonymizing the cryptocurrencies, right? I mean, so companies like Chainalysis and other, right, who are there working with law enforcement in order to help them nail some of the drug lords and the online markets, like the underground markets admin out there. I mean, law enforcement are getting better and better. So Bitcoin is no longer anonymized, and we know that many companies are working on de-anonymizing some of the other ledgers as well. So I agree, man. I mean, I think folks realize that at this point, and they opt cash. It's fairly easy. You can still be anonymous, right? Because you take someone else's identity.
And you don't have to go through that extra thing. So even if you're using Monero, you have to bridge hop from Monero over to Bitcoin or Litecoin or something like that. Then you have to cash it out at Coinbase or someplace like that. So instead of worrying that, just cut that middleman out, steal cash.
That's right. And I think they're doing a very good job doing that.
They are. They're doing they're doing really well.
They're rational actors, great businessmen, in my opinion, right? And they simply know what they're doing. So to me, it's exactly what you were saying, along with the fact that they know law enforcement are getting better in de-anonymizing some of the ledgers out there, and so they opt cash.
Let me ask you this, and because you've got, it's evident you've got experience. Where's it going?
I think it's going to a very nasty place at this point, simply because I don't see the right controls in the right places at this point. I see people with no experience dealing with this, people who do not understand the ecosystem, people who do not understand how to connect the dots, people who build tools which will maybe prevent here, but will create a bigger issue over there, right? And if you're not creating tools in a way that take into consideration the ecosystem, then you're just creating more issues, right? I mean, I'm not going to talk about some of the companies we've seen creating issues to the government during the last 4 years or so, right? But we know that they created a major issue, right? I don't want to say that they are responsible,
but they were a problem, and I think we are on the same page as which companies those are.
And you were there with me, seeing the criminals, wanting to have those companies
Absolutely.
as barriers because they figure out a way to bypass their security like this. The first day of unemployment and
Right.
SBA loans were offered for the public, right?
Right.
So unfortunately, I don't see the industry recovering from that state of mind where you say, I need a new amazing AI tool which will solve all the solution. Folks who talk that way, in my opinion, don't really understand the ecosystem, and they're simply setting us to more problems.
I don't think they care, David. I think it's more about selling a product or service and putting money in.
That's
pocket.
right.
I don't think they really care about solving a problem at all.
I'm with you 100%, right? And so because of that, I don't think that we're going in the right direction. The right direction will be developing tools and policies which will allow people to deal with the ecosystem, to disrupt the ecosystem, and simply make fraud undesired
Right.
to folks who engage in it. This is not where things are at the moment, unfortunately.
No, I agree. I absolutely agree with you. David, we are not going to solve the world's problems in 50 minutes. So break it off. We're gonna wrap things up here. But when you are not, I was asked the other day. I was on Jordan Peterson, and they asked me, "Hey, what kind of hobbies do you have?" And I drew a blank because, other than waking up to this stuff and going to sleep to it, I don't really do much of anything else. And
It is a hobby at this point, right?
It is. So do you have any hobbies outside of this?
Yeah, I mean, I do have hobbies. I mean, I love music, so I love jazz.
What do you listen to? Jazz, iconic jazz, or new wave, or what?
Not the new waves. I like the Miles Davis, the Chick Corea, the
Yes.
standards. I mean, I remember listening to acoustic band when I was a kid. I don't know if you know Chick Corea and
Yeah.
Dave Weckl, John Patitucci. I remember listening to them when I was a kid, and I for some reason, I don't know, I started listening to them now, got into YouTube, and then seeing them playing this sort of live. Amazing, right? I mean, so things like that. I mean, jazz, so Miles and Bill Evans, my favorite. I love music. Of course, sports. I love running and swimming. So yeah, we do have some hobby because, doing this, as you know, adds a lot of stress to your life. Because these guys like to threaten you. They like to victimize you, and you need to find an outlet.
They do. I mean, they really do. They take a lot of pleasure in that. Me,
Yeah.
I planned on having a break. I went and did this show, and then I was going to come back, and I've got these video game systems. I never play them. So I was going to finally dive into Zelda Breath of the Wild. I've had it for 5 years.
Nice.
For 5 years. And what stopped me from playing it was that Shark Tank crap on Telegram. That
Right.
sucked me in, and that made me even more angry. So,
I understand, man.
I'm hoping
But
one of these days.
You got to find time to engage in some hobby, man, because it's good for you to find an outlet to all this stress these guys add to our lives.
You're right, and I talk to people about that when I give a presentation. If I'm talking to fraud analysts, I'm like, hey, it's a job. You've got to give it up. You can't eat and drink this stuff 24/7. And
right.
Here I am. I do that. So go figure.
So next time you're in Atlanta, we go to a jazz club together, man. Have some beer and enjoy it.
Dude, don't say that. I'm in Birmingham, man.
Just let me know when you want to come and visit.
All right. Look, if someone wants to reach out to you to talk about cybercrime, some of the studies, maybe get you to speak or on a panel, something like that, how do they reach you?
We're on LinkedIn. Just Google my name. That's the best way to reach out.
All right. David Maimon, I cannot think. Am I saying your name right?
It's Maimon, but it's okay, man.
Of course it is. I apologize.
Don't
Mr.
apologize.
Maimon.
Come on, man.
All right. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on the show. I truly appreciate it. David Maimon, you are absolutely amazing, truly.
Thanks so much again for having me. I'm a huge fan, Brett. And hopefully you'll come over to Atlanta and we'll get that beer, man.
I will absolutely do that. No doubt I'll take you up on that soon. So if you didn't
Sounds
mean
good,
it,
man.
boy, are you in trouble.
I mean it, man.
All right, we're going to close things out. How do we close it out? We close it out the exact same way every single time. Stay safe, stay secure, stay vigilant. More importantly, understand that this is the Criminal Thoughts Show. At the end of the day, just do the right damn thing. I'm Brett Johnson. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.